Most people think that teaching their child to read early will make their child bored when they start going to school. I used to think this too when my twins were turning 4, and I almost intentionally didn't teach them what they were ready for at that stage out of this fear. Fast forward to our third born, and I didn't want to make this mistake again. He wasn't the poster child for reading early. He developed speech much later than his siblings, and he was much more content excavating the sandbox and racing Hot Wheels cars in the living room. But by this point, I knew the science, and I knew that his optimal brain development for language was right now. And if I could give him that head start before kindergarten, he would engage in kindergarten with much more confidence, and he wouldn't fall through the cracks of a busy classroom. Because if he was going to struggle, I wanted to get ahead of that struggle before that reading window started to close. So I dug into the research and discovered the most effective methods for teaching young kids to learn to read. I started using all of these science-backed methods, and within weeks, my then 3-year-old son was already reading short words and even some sentences, and my mind was blown. We kept at this for a few more weeks, and he was reading short stories. I had friends asking, how did you teach your child to read so fast? And so I actually compiled what we did into video lessons and activities so that they could do the same with their kids, and they had the same result. So I'm excited because in today's video, I'm going to share with you the exact method that we used to get him reading while still managing the busy schedules of his older siblings and also balancing the needs of his baby brother. So now you're probably wondering, will this work for my child? Is my child even ready for this? This will work for your child if they can stay focused on a task for 5 to 10 minutes, if they're expressing interest in reading stories, maybe they're bringing books for you to read to them, or maybe they're pretending to read on their own, and also if they can repeat sounds back to you fairly accurately. They're ready. So the first thing I did makes learning to read incredibly easy, but if it's done wrong, it can actually take months of frustration. So here's what I mean. Let's say I was teaching him the letter D, and I was teaching him that D says duh. When he gets to the blending stage where he's actually putting sounds together and he sees a word like this, he would pronounce it s-a-d, sada. Rather than if I taught him the correct sound of D, which is d, a very short sound, then when he goes to actually blend this together, he would say s-a-d, sad, and he would become much more successful quickly just by knowing those correct letter sounds. I actually have a video of the most common letter sounds that parents get wrong, which I'll be sure to link at the end of this video. So be sure to check that out if you want to make sure you know those correct letter sounds before you teach them to your child. So to teach him these sounds, we would still use alphabet games, letter puzzles, alphabet books, all the normal resources that most parents use. But rather than focusing on the names of those letters, we would spend a lot of times just learning the sounds of those letters. Now, the second thing was to take those sounds that he was learning and start to listen for them inside of words. It's one thing for them to know a bunch of letter sounds, but it's another thing for them to connect that the A in salamander is actually there because there's an A in the word. So we would play games where he'd have to listen for those sounds inside of the words and just do a different activity when he would hear them. So he would throw a ball, or we'd arm wrestle, or he'd jump from a pillow to another pillow anytime that he heard the sound of whatever letter we were working on. This really started to build his skill of what we call phonemic awareness, which is just that ability to hear all those individual sounds inside of words. And what I found to be really helpful was to make sure that those sounds weren't just at the beginning of words. They were sometimes in the middle, sometimes at the end, so that he really had to tune his ear to hear those sounds anywhere inside of those words. Now, the third thing was fun because it was something we could do in the car or on our walk to the bus stop or even in the grocery store when we were strolling the aisles. And it also helped to really build that phonemic awareness, which his teachers actually commented on multiple times when he started school. So I would basically just give him word challenges. So if we were out and we saw a jet in the sky, I would say, what do you think a jet would become if we changed the j to a p? And he would get such a kick out of it, thinking that the jet would become a pet just by changing that one sound. And it actually became fun for me because as he got better at it, it was more fun for me to create really big challenges to really hone that skill of changing sounds, taking away sounds, or adding sounds to words. So once he had a few letter sounds under his belt and he was getting really good at hearing those sounds inside of words, we started the blending process of just 2 letters that he would know, and we would start putting them together. Now, I found it really helpful to start with just a dot under each letter and have him put his finger under those sounds and slide his finger across as he put those sounds together. So let's say he was doing the A and B sound. He would start with his finger here and hold out that sound, ab, until he got to the next dot when he could say that next sound. This really helped to connect those spaces in between those 2 sounds to help him just blend sounds together. And then after he really mastered those 2-letter blends together, we would add a 3rd letter and have him do the same thing. Start with the sound cab. And as he got better at 3-letter blends, then we were able to start adding some consonant blends at the beginning, which just continued to expand his ability to read longer words. Now, 4th, I needed to figure out what to do with those rule breaker words. Words like of, where if he sounded it out, it would say off, off. So with these words, where they didn't follow normal blending patterns, I started making almost like a video game that he was able to use to start to memorize some of these. I wanted to get him to a point where he was still decoding them, but also it was triggering in his mind that they would jump off the page as a word that didn't follow the rules. And it was just a fun way for him to practice these words over and over so that when he was reading them in a sentence, he knew them automatically. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I compiled everything that we did into video lessons, sight word games, phonemic awareness games, everything that we just talked about into a reading platform that parents can use to walk their child through the exact same process and get their child reading. So if that's something that you're interested in, be sure to grab it in the link below. And if you are nervous about making sure you have those letter sounds correctly nailed down before you teach them to your child, watch this video next.